All right, welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, 7 News political analyst Justin Allen Rose. And as you can see, I am in a brand new studio. It looks totally different from the last couple podcasts I've done because it's no longer on Zoom. It's no longer on a simple webcam on my laptop. I'm actually in a studio, and I sure hope it sounds better. I know it looks better. I want to thank, the 7 News engineers who put this together, and the one and only JB, Jared Burke, who, if you don't know, operations manager, does the storm chasing, and also puts together Podcast Room in his spare time. So thank you for that. But with that out the way, let's just go ahead and get into the show. The reason why you watch it: political information and political analysis with Oklahoma politics at the forefront. And of course, this week was a heck of a week for Oklahoma politics because it's the start of the legislative session, the 60th legislature right here in Oklahoma. And it started with Kevin Stitt delivering that State of the State address at a packed People's House. And it was, at least in my view, I would suspect a little bit more energy from Kevin Stitt. It's his 6th State of the State address, his next to last. The next one, this last State of the State address, will be next year because he's term limited out. And again, we're just a little over a year away from the next governor race here in Oklahoma. So this session should be one to remember. And one of the things that Kevin Stitt really hit on, especially at the forefront of the State address, was he really painted himself within that Trump victory that happened in November. He kept saying how we have a mandate. Not only does Donald Trump have a mandate, but because, the country, not only did, all 77 counties of Oklahoma voted red for Donald Trump, but the nation did as well. And so he really used that to paint the picture of not only does Donald Trump have a mandate, but we have a mandate to help Donald Trump with his national mandate right here in the Sooner State. But let's go ahead and take a look at part of the State address, especially him using that sort of language with Donald Trump to paint a picture of a mandate for the Sooner State.
Not extreme ideology, gender ideology, not Green New Deals or open borders. Americans voted for courage. They voted for freedom. They voted for the American dream, not more government. We have a mandate to support and pass conservative, limited government legislation that makes the American dream possible for all 4 million Oklahomans. In order to do that, we need to commit to these 4 principles. We need to, number 1, protect Oklahoma taxpayers. Number 2, let's be the best state for business. Number 3, let's safeguard our savings. And number 4, let's protect the Oklahoma way of life. These ideas aren't controversial, but they will require tough choices. They will require sacrifice. They will require that we trust that Oklahomans know how to spend their money better than the government can.
So as you can see, it was really he painted that mandate picture for us, at least in terms of Donald Trump and everything like that conservative movement. But he also hit on those 4 things that he wants to see the legislature really work on this session, really surface level stuff. And that is not anything different than what we typically see in these State of the State addresses. We want to keep it kind of surface level so nobody can really hit you too hard if you get a fact wrong, let's say, within this address. But he really hit on that Oklahoma way of life, which is going to be interesting because later on in the show, we look at Cyndi Munson's response. If you don't know who Cyndi Munson is, she is the House Democratic Minority Leader. So she leads the Democrat within the House of Representatives right here in Oklahoma. And so she had a very scathing response. We'll look at 2 clips of hers coming up. But also with the State of the State address, Kevin Stitt really took time, which isn't a surprise, shouldn't be a surprise to anybody if you have watched and listened to Kevin Stitt's rhetoric in the, the months and the weeks leading up to the State of the State address and the years prior as well, is that he called for even more tax cuts. Of course, if you remember from last legislative session, he got a very big win under his belt when the state and the legislature passed his grocery tax cut, completely eliminated the state portion of the grocery tax right here in Oklahoma. And this was something that both sides voted for, the Democrats and the Republicans. It was very bipartisan manner, a bipartisan policy. I mean, this was something that the Democrats were calling on sessions prior, but we finally see it got passed. And last session, too, Kevin Stitt didn't want to stop at that. He said he wants the state to be at a path to zero, meaning 0% personal income tax. And he also took time during the State of the State address, like I mentioned, to call for even more tax cuts. And we're already seeing legislators, the big ones. We see the Speaker of the House, Kyle Herbert, and then we also see, I believe, Lottie Paxton over in the Senate side for the Republican, saying they are going to try to introduce legislation which does do just what Kevin Stitt is going to say within this next clip we're about to watch. But they did mention how they're going to be cautious politically in trying to get it done. But without further ado, let us go ahead and watch what Kevin Stitt wants to do with tax cuts this coming session.
States all around us, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Colorado, even Louisiana, are cutting their income taxes and have lower rates than we do. If we don't act quickly, we're going to be left behind and we're going to be considered a high-tax state. So I'm calling for half and a path, a half a point cut to the individual and the business income tax, and a path to zero income tax.
And that was met with applause, as you can hear and see there. And so it does seem like we could be getting more tax cuts for the Sooner State this session. Now, the opposing side of this proposal, coming from the Democrats, and if you follow, I'm going to keep mentioning Cyndi Munson's name throughout this podcast. It's probably throughout this session, because she has been, at least rhetorically, on social media, have been hitting the Republicans, including specifically Kevin Stitt, hard on X, all throughout social media. And she has been basically saying, to Kevin Stitt directly, responding right to him, to his post on X, saying, hey, if you do this tax cut, your legacy for the Sooner State is not going to be good. You're going to leave the state in dire straits, and basically she's trying to paint the picture that you're pretty much going to leave the Sooner State, Oklahoma, in a sort of downwind. We're going to get in a situation where we can't pass a balanced budget at the legislative arena. And if you know anything about, Oklahoma politics, there is one thing the legislature is tasked to do constitutionally every single session, and that is passing a balanced budget. And before Kevin Stitt got into office, there was some worries about whether or not that balanced budget was actually going to be able to be passed. And so Cyndi Munson is painting that picture that these tax cuts, one, is only going to help, those who already have a lot within society, and going to hurt the state in terms of, one, being able to pass a balanced budget, but then also coming up might hurt those working class families when, those crucial services, she is saying, won't get supplied through these tax dollars. And going kind of to the next big story from the State of the State address, and depending on how big you really think this story is might depend on your political ideology and how closely you are really paying attention to national politics. And that is because Kevin Stitt also, during this State of the State address, announced the creation of Doge Oklahoma. If you don't know what Doge is, the Department of Governmental Efficiency at the national level, being headed by, of course, that one name everybody knows, Elon Musk, is pretty much just at least being painted as a way to slash overspending by the government or, misuse of funds. And so Kevin Stitt said we're going to see the same thing right here in Oklahoma, which again goes right back into really piggybacking off of national politics, piggybacking off of, at least right now, a president who is acting as if he has a mandate. He won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. And so it does seem like, at least in terms of the amount of power the president has, seems like he has a lot right now. So it does also seem like Kevin Stitt is sort of riding that coattails as the governor of Oklahoma to, one, try to also help, the president out with those objectives that he wants to get done. But then hopefully, I'm assuming in Kevin Stitt's eyes, that might mean good things for Oklahoma downwind. But let's go ahead and see his announcement creating that Doge okay.
President Trump and Elon Musk, through Doge, will determine the economic trajectory of our nation. By cutting the size of the federal government, we can finally start having an honest conversation about our national debt. If we continue on the path we're on, we're going to be caught in a death spiral. Government is overspending, causing inflation to rise rapidly. To deflect the burden of rising costs, federal government expands more benefits for more people. More people end up relying on the government, resulting in more deficit spending. It's a great big cycle. And now we are spending a quarter of our federal income, 25%, to make interest-only payments on our national debt. That's more than we spend on our national defense. I was at Mar-a-Lago a few weeks ago, and I talked to President Trump about DOGE. And I'm excited about the momentum, and we're going to build on it here in Oklahoma. Today, I'm launching DOGE OK to keep the focus on flat budgets and limited government.
So once again, met with applause by a room, mostly filled by those Republican legislators. So we see that he does have support for these initiatives when trying to help Trump, of course, get those objectives done. Getting that flat budget, that is something that Stitt hit on throughout the last legislative session too. But the Democrats, again, opposing it, saying that we're not in a space to do. The state has a lot more responsibilities on their shoulders, and so we need to spend more money in order to meet those growing needs of a growing state. And Munson, again, hit Kevin Stitt really hard. Kevin Stitt just released a little video on X as well, audio video. I don't know if that makes sense. But basically, just a still picture with audio over it of him sort of explaining how he came to, wanted to put DOGE within Oklahoma and everything regarding that. Well, Cyndi Munson reposted it and also had a little bit to say herself, saying how basically nothing is coming out of Kevin Stitt's original, just being taken from Donald Trump, and also kind of hit on, hey, and I've seen Jacob Rosecrans also hit on this as well, basically say, hey, the Republicans have held control of Oklahoma, at least the government, really large. I mean, they held the government since 2006, but really was starting to grow in that supermajority around 2010. Where is this growing of government coming from? Is it coming from, supposedly the conservative limited government side? Or where is it truly coming from? What is DOGE OK really looking at in terms of trying to slash in terms of government spending? But I'm sure this isn't going to be the last time we hear about DOGE OK. We got one more video to watch from Kevin's State of the State address. And it's basically just his vision for what he wants the lasting legacy going to be for Oklahoma. And so it kind of gives us a window into the mind of Kevin Stitt in terms of what he's trying to accomplish in his last 2 years as the governor of Oklahoma. Let's listen.
I want Oklahoma to be known around the world as the state where businesses come because they know that they can operate freely without fear of gotcha bureaucrats or burdensome regulations. The state where parents have the freedom to educate their children in line with their values. The state where families flock because they know their kids can grow up in a safe, hopeful environment. The state where neighbors care for each other and there is always hope for tomorrow. Oklahoma is a haven, a shining city on a hill, and the American dream is alive and well in Oklahoma. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of Oklahoma. Let's have a great 2025. Thanks, everybody.
And so as you can see, he really playing up that family focus initiatives. And so we're going to probably hear a little bit more of that rhetoric because he chose that as the lasting image that he gave those who are listening to his State of the State address. So we should be seeing more of that as we gear towards, go head first into this session, which started Monday. But of course, as with any State of the State address, whether it, State of the Union address, we always see the Democrats give their response to it. And we saw the Democrats, both the Senate and the House, but I'm going to really focus on the Democrats' House response to this State of the State address because Cyndi Munson has been on a roll if we're going to talk about rhetoric because she's really beheading that working class families. It seems, at least to me, that working class message. We saw it on the national political scene. That was really able to help Trump, win back the presidency. And to me, that's what people want. They want a working class message. They want a fighter that seems to be on the side of the working class. And if we're just going to talk about, the Sooner State on the side of the working class Oklahomans. And that's what Cyndi Munson really laced in her rhetoric within this response. So let's go ahead and really look at this first clip and see how she really hit on how Stitt mentioned Trump over and over again within his State of the State address. Here we go.
First thing I want to highlight, and while I'm not surprised, I am deeply disappointed that he spent so much of his time talking about the president and talking about what the president wants to do and taking time to appease him. As I was sitting there taking my notes and listening to him, I was thinking, it's good to know our governor was knocking the door of Donald Trump, but not those of everyday Oklahomans. He is not focused on what working families are talking about at the doorstep and what they're talking about to their state leaders. Right now, they're talking about the cost of groceries, the cost of putting gasoline in their cars, the cost of paying rent, everyday expenses that are going to be more and more difficult under this presidential administration. And it sounds like our governor is right in line with the president.
And so, knocking on the door of the president instead of knocking on the doors of everyday Oklahomans. If that line, to me, really hit hard on social media. If you don't follow me on TikTok, go right ahead, J.A. Rose Reports on TikTok, because this was the clip that I posted. I basically did a 5-second intro, say, hey, Cyndi Munson had a scathing response to Stitt's State of the State address. Let's take a listen, and just played this actual clip. And so you would have seen it a little bit beforehand if you follow me on TikTok. But this clip did numbers on that app, and people were commenting how much they love Cyndi Munson or asking who she is. And so this sort of rhetoric is something that if the Democrats are going to pick up seats and really fight back against the supermajority that is the Republican Party in Oklahoma, this is the line of attack that's really going to have to take place. And we're seeing Cyndi Munson day in and day out really use that sort of rhetoric. And so that's why I'm really focusing on Munson. Like I said, Julia Kurt, who is the Senate minority leader for the Democrats, she does a very good job as well, but she is really, in terms of her rhetoric, really focused on policy. She, to me, is a policy wonk. That's not a negative sense, not in a negative way I'm saying that, but she's just a policy wonk in terms of she's really focused on policy, and when she tries to explain it, it comes off as really technical, which again isn't bad, but in terms of hitting that emotional effect that you need to bring people out to vote and to really get people on your side, Cyndi Munson is hitting it day in and day out. And again, she talked about the working class throughout this response. And we're going to see it in this next clip. We're going to see in this next clip I just brought up how she, again, once more, hit on the fact that the Democrats, in her view, that what she's saying, that the Democrats are on the side of the working class Oklahomans. I mean, just like in this past clip we watched, we talk about the price of eggs, the price of groceries. I wonder, though, if that little line at the end of that clip that we just watched are her hitting back on President Trump, saying how, the price of eggs, the price of groceries, how everybody's going to have a harder time under this presidential administration, under Trump's administration. I wonder if that backfires a little bit. All the goodwill you gain in this first part of the clip, talking about working class voters, talking about working class Oklahomans. Does that adding part of hitting Trump a little bit on the top of his head, does that negate that goodwill that you gain for somebody who maybe voted for Trump, but is on your side in that first part of the clip? I don't know if I would. If I'm a political strategist crafting a political message, I don't know. If I'm running in Oklahoma, even if I would be a Democrat, crafted this message for a Democratic politician, I don't know if I would include a hit on Trump because, again, 77 counties, all 77 counties in Oklahoma voted for President Trump. But here's another clip. Let's go ahead and watch it, and so we can see, again, really doubling down on this message.
All that we heard in Stitt's State of the State address this afternoon, again, not a surprise. We prefer that he focus on working Oklahomans, working families, working on the things that we know are the issues that people are talking about at their dining room tables. They're talking about how do we pay rent? How do we make ends meet? How do we ensure that our kids have access to child care? And how do we make sure our public education system is supported and protected? He talked a lot about vouchers, but he didn't talk about putting more money in the funding formula or increasing teacher pay. Again, there are proposals before us that can improve the quality of life of everyday Oklahomans and their families.
Powerful, powerful response from Cyndi Munson. Really painted that picture. Here's what he talked about. Here's what he didn't. Here's what he said about the president. Here's what he didn't say about the things that you care about. And really hit on the uncertainty that a lot of people are hitting on in their everyday lives. You know, how are we going to afford this? How are we going to give our child, our daughter, our son the proper education needed in a state that is currently ranking 49th in education? And so the more and more we're going to see Cyndi Munson and the rest of the Democrats, it's going to take more than Cyndi Munson to really get the Democrats over that hurdle, over that hump, to really gain back seats within a legislature that is just blood red. There's one more thing that I really want to talk about for this podcast, for this first podcast in this brand new, beautiful studio. And that is backlash. And I'll go ahead and merge. Now we can see this pretty cool clip, or should I say website? Oh, it's moving on me now. Interesting. I'm telling you, I'm going to learn a little bit more about this. But as we can see, I'll merge back now. But that was a picture of Elgin Senator Dusty Deevers. And over the weekend, so this is being recorded on Friday, February 7th, around 12:30. So the weekend prior to this Friday, again, February 7th, he was hit hard. This Elgin Senator was hit hard about a bill that he'd authored. And this bill, oh, okay, I know how to do it. I'll remember now. Okay, so let me go ahead and merge this and pull up this. And now let's see. Okay, now I got it. Okay, so now you can see the article that I wanted you to see before. But he introduced a bill. Dusty Deevers introduced a bill. It was Senate Bill 1017. And it was about, the bill was related to the coverage of educationally necessary school-based services as it relates to the Americans with Disabilities Education Act. And it basically has to do with who is able to truly get the services they need in order to have kind of the education that they get for free through, public funds. And it was really what people were hitting him on. I'm going to go ahead and let's see if it does it. Okay, yes. Okay, and so I'm going to pull up the original article that I wrote on Monday, February 3rd. Again, the start of the session. So he was going in to this news session with people calling. I mean, I had legislators telling me that they're being inundated with phone calls about this bill. And these are legislators in Norman, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, that are telling me that they are getting phone calls after phone calls about this one bill, telling them to please vote this bill down. Like I mentioned, Senate Bill 1017. And it was all about this definition of school-based services and what is actually excluded from the bill. And so here's the definition right here. You can see it right here. It says school-based services means specifically designed instruction and services that are educationally necessary for the eligible student to receive a free and appropriate public education. And here's the bolded part that a lot of people were hitting on that they had concerns about. Says this excludes medically necessary services that are not included within the definition of educationally necessary under this specific act, such as non-educational health-related and rehabilitative services, including, but not limited to, health examinations, immunizations, flu vaccines, eye examinations, speech and language therapy, physical therapy. And so a lot of people thought that if this bill passed, if this bill, was able to get signed by the governor, that their kids or their cousins' kids or their sister's kids or brother's kids, what have you, were not going to be able to get the services they needed to actually be able to get a free public education that, that the Oklahoma Constitution says that every kid will be afforded in the state of Oklahoma. One social media user even said they were heartbroken and angry when they learned about this bill. On Sunday, after this weekend full of backlash, Senator Deevers did take to social media, both X and Facebook, and basically saying this: I appreciate your input, and this is the Deevers quote, I appreciate your input regarding SB 1017. I want to clarify a few things about this bill, and then give an update about my plans. I also understand there is some confusion about the language of the bill and a need for clarifying amendments, to which I am working on. So that was Sunday. And so he said he's working on clarifying information, and basically also says within this statement that it was not his purpose to take away any students' needed, therapy that they need to actually get an education. What he was concerned about was basically he was just calling for an audit on these types of services to make sure the funds are being used as they're, quote-unquote, supposedly needed to be used for. But then, early this week, we also get sent a press release by Dusty Devers, his office, saying, you know what? I'm not looking for amendments anymore. I'm just going to pull the bill out of consideration entirely. So this bill is no longer up for consideration, but he said he is still calling for the audit because he doesn't want, people's tax dollars, he says, to be used in a way that was not designed or not appropriated by either the Oklahoma legislature or United States Congress if we're talking about the federal Department of Education. But also, we're still going to continue to watch this SB 1017 bill because while, yes, he removed it from consideration, there is still other ways in order to get that same exact language into another bill. So let's say for some reason the Trump administration is successful in terms of dismantling the federal Department of Education, which generally does supply a lot of these funds for special education needs. Let's say later on down in the session, we have, let's say in March, we have this one bill that is failing to get past committee. We have this process in Oklahoma and other states as well that's called bill shucking, which basically allows certain legislators to input any sort of language they want within that bill. Now, there is some little tidbits within that basically saying, hey, you can't put any sort of language. The language that you're putting inside that shell bill, let's say, has to be in some sort of relation in terms of the subject that was in that bill to begin with. But again, these sort of checks and balances need to be met with humans. They operate within humans. And so if nobody's going to check that, we could see this sort of bill continue along in this path. But we'll continue to watch it here at 7 News. Man, so that was the first For the Record podcast. I think it's the first podcast of 2025, especially at least the first podcast in this beautiful brand new studio. But not only will this studio be used for this For the Record podcast, we're going to expand 7 News' podcast offering. Jared Burke, who I mentioned earlier on in the beginning of this podcast, he's going to be sitting down with somebody to talk about this bill which is affecting storm chasers. And so it's going to be really exciting. And like I keep saying, this podcast room, I keep calling it a podcast room, but it's really a digital room. This is going to open up so many new opportunities for KSWO 7 News, for breaking news, and to just deliver the news that you guys want to hear and want to listen to. But I think that's it. As always, reach out to me in email if you want something covered. If you see a bill that you want to have explained or me do a deep dive or analyze the rhetoric of somebody on social media, send me an email, respond to this podcast, send me a comment, whatever it is, get my attention. I would love to hear from you. All right, so that is it. This has been For the Record of February 7th. I'm your host, 7 News political analyst Justin Rose, and this has been For the Record.